Hello and a very warm welcome. It's 9 p.m. IST and we are coming to you live from the WION headquarters in Noida, India. I am Molly Gambhir and this is Gravitas with a new look but the same old spirit. Let's get started. Are we inching closer to the dreaded Taiwan war? Tonight on Gravitas, we tell you all about China's latest move. It held military drills around Taiwan as a punishment. Is this China's last rehearsal before the final act? That's our top story tonight on Gravitas. And here's a look at what else is lined up for you on the show. Are Pakistanis kidnapping Indians in Turkey? We tell you what the reports are saying and why this is a major reason for concern. Has Rishi Sunak committed political suicide? With the elections in the UK now slated for the 4th of July, Sunak has invited serious trouble as he struggles to deal with a mess of his own making. We also get to the story of a man who reportedly spent nearly 3 months at the bottom of the ocean, only to re-emerge 10 years younger. All this and more coming up tonight on Gravitas. The Chinese military surrounded Taiwan. China has encircled the island with warships and fighter jets. Is this China's last rehearsal before the final act? Are we inching closer to the dreaded Taiwan war, or is there a hidden meaning in these war games? Is the blockade of Taiwan meant to deter the United States? Let's start off with what we know so far. China has carried out mock airstrikes, mock sea strikes. This has mostly been around Taiwan's Kinmen and Matsu Islands. Let's pull out a map for you and show you where these islands exactly are. China has sent heavily armed warplanes in the skies near Taiwan. The drills began this morning at 7:45 a.m. local time. It's meant to go on for 2 days. China is calling this drill a punishment. For whom, you ask? Taiwan, obviously. But what for? Separatist acts, says Beijing. You see, in Taiwan, President Lai Ching-te has just been inaugurated. In his inauguration speech on Monday, Lai called on China to stop threatening Taiwan, and Beijing clearly did not take that well. The drills, you see, are a response. China says the drills are, quote-unquote, fully justified and necessary. But are they really? The Chinese state broadcaster is celebrating the drills as a, quote-unquote, powerful disciplinary action. You don't need me to tell you that this is a clear provocation. What you have here is China flexing its muscle. The dragon is trying to show Taiwan what it is actually capable of, how it can cut off Taiwan from the rest of the world, seize control of its airspace, the surrounding waters, block Taiwan's business, even its energy imports. In fact, the state broadcaster CCTV in its coverage said the drills were partly aimed at rehearsing an economic blockade of the island. Taiwan, as you know, is the world's leading semiconductor supplier. How has Taiwan reacted? Taiwan's new leader, Lai Ching-te, has said that he will do what it takes to defend Taiwan.
I will stand on the front line with all the brothers and sisters from the National Army to defend the national peace together.
This is Kinmen. This Taiwanese island is a stone throw away from China. Like you can see on your screen, one can literally see the Chinese skyline from Kinmen. During the second Taiwan Strait conflict, Kinmen was among the worst hit, by the way. On the 23rd of August 1958, Chinese troops attacked Kinmen. There was heavy artillery shelling for 44 days. Taiwan says it lost 439 soldiers, 80 civilians, which also explains the anti-landing spikes on the beaches of Kinmen. But today, as the Chinese military rehearses the blockade of Taiwan, the people in Kinmen are calm. And why do you think that is? Is it their confidence in Taiwanese defense, or is there more?
It might be just a threat. They have been talking about it for 20-30 years. If a war is bound to happen, if they plan to attack, they would have struck 20-30 years ago.
And what do you make of such sentiment? Does China really not plan to attack Taiwan? Of course, there are these drills. Chinese President Xi Jinping has time and again said that China will be reunified with Taiwan. In 2019, he also went a step ahead and said that Beijing will use force if necessary. What if this is all meant to blockade US from Taiwan and not Taiwan? What if bombing Taiwan was never a part of Xi Jinping's plan? In December 2023, the Chinese President Xi Jinping and US President Joe Biden met at San Francisco. Do you know what Xi Jinping told Biden? That China would prefer taking Taiwan peacefully, not by force. Xi Jinping also said that American analysts were wrong in predicting that China would wage a war on Taiwan by 2025 or 2027. The Chinese president simply said that Beijing has set no such timeline. Beijing views Taiwan as a part of China. You know, one country, two systems. Even the United Nations does not recognize Taiwan as a separate country. Same with the United States. Washington switched its diplomatic recognition from Taiwan to China in 1979. Back to the question. Does China really want to wage a war against Taiwan? Experts believe Xi Jinping does not want to risk being seen as a leader waging a war against his own people. Number two, a war against Taiwan will be devastating for the island's business. Like we told you, Taiwan is a semiconductor exporter. China, of all the countries, understands the importance of semiconductors. After all, Beijing is betting big on technology. So what really are these drills all about? Are they meant to blockade American presence in the waters around Taiwan? Do you know when was the last time China announced such a drill? It was last August, right after Lai, who was then the vice president, stopped over in the US on his way to Paraguay. The US is Taiwan's most important ally, by the way. It is also Taiwan's supplier of military hardware. Time and again, the US President Joe Biden has vowed to defend Taiwan should China invade the island. The US, as you already know, is not China's best friend. Last year in April, China was once again seen practicing the blockade of Taiwan. It was right after Taiwan's then President Tsai Ing-wen met then US House Speaker Kevin McCarthy in California. And back to the question, are these drills meant to blockade the US? The latest comment of the Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson only adds weight to this theory.
We urge the United States to stop condoning and supporting the forces for Taiwan independence and interfering in China's internal affairs. Any act that jeopardizes China's national sovereignty and territorial integrity will be met with a resolute and forceful response from the Chinese side.
Are Pakistanis kidnapping Indians overseas? Before you start wondering what's going on, let me get you the details. It's a shocking story. Turkish police have arrested 3 Pakistanis on charges of kidnapping an Indian citizen. Let me say that again. 3 Pakistanis have been arrested by the Turkish police on charges of kidnapping an Indian citizen. What really happened? According to a report by the Kama press news agency, Turkish police said that the kidnappers demanded 2 million Indian rupees from the family of the Indian. That's equivalent to $24,000. And who is this Indian? According to Turkish media, the Indian who was kidnapped had come to Turkey for work. He was working at a restaurant in Istanbul. So what happened? How was he kidnapped? According to the story by the Kama press news agency, reports say that 3 Pakistani asylum seekers lured the Indian to the city of Edirne. It's a city in the northwest of the country. They did this under the pretext of securing him a job at a translation company and then, as per the report, abducted him. What happened then? Was he rescued? Yes, he was. And let's tell you how. As per the Kama press news agency report, security authorities rescued the man after a friend of his contacted the police. The report also saying that according to the police, the kidnappers threatened his family by sending them a video and that they had tied his hands and feet. I know this is a lot to take in, and there are a series of questions. Why was the Indian targeted? Why was he targeted in particular? Did the kidnappers have some locals helping them? The report by the Kama press news agency says a Turkish citizen with a criminal record has been arrested on charges of providing shelter to the kidnappers. It also says that, as per reports, during the police operation, an unlicensed firearm, 4 pistols and a sum of money were discovered and seized. Like I said, there are a series of question marks here, more so because this is not an isolated case. Let me tell you about what happened in Cambodia. As per a report in Khmer Times, 2 Pakistani men who kidnapped 2 Indian nationals and held them for 3 weeks in order to extort a ransom have been arrested in the capital of Cambodia. The report said that police freed the Indian men who had been detained from 25th of April to May 16. It added that the victims had been handcuffed, beaten and blindfolded during their ordeal. The report says that, as per the victims, the Pakistani suspects locked the door of their room and prevented them from leaving and confiscated their passports. The report adds that the suspects demanded ransom in exchange for their release and that their ordeal came to an end when the 2 victims shouted for help at a time when the 3 Pakistani suspects were not with them. Is there more to all of this than what meets the eye? These 2 cases, surfacing around the same time, raise serious concern and leave behind a lot of big questions. We will be tracking the developments very closely. Shifting focus now to the conflict in West Asia, US President Joe Biden's Israel policy has backfired. Today, Israel is more isolated globally than it ever was. Countries that traditionally supported it have started questioning it. Israel's closest ally, the United States of America, is also very concerned. Listen in to what the White House security advisor, Jake Sullivan, said today at a press briefing.
I think it's a fair question. As a country that stands strong in defense of Israel in international forums like the United Nations, we certainly have seen a growing chorus of voices, including voices that had previously been in support of Israel, drift in another direction. That is of concern to us because we do not believe that that contributes to Israel's long-term security or vitality.
We are concerned. That's the line coming out of the White House. One after another, the pillars that propped up Washington's support for Israel are crumbling down. Will the confused policy of the Biden administration cost the president dearly come the elections in November? I ask that because of three reasons. Reason number one, America's allies in Europe are growing increasingly frustrated with Israel's war in Gaza. As we told you yesterday, 3 European countries have moved to officially recognize Palestinian statehood. Ireland, Spain, and Norway have announced that they will formally recognize the Palestinian state from next week. Of course, their decision was met with fury in Israel, but their move shows just how frustrated the world has grown with the prolonged war in Gaza. Announcing their decision, all the 3 European leaders, by the way, stressed that recognizing Palestinian statehood would pave the way for a two-state solution in the region. In the two-state solution, the Palestinians who currently reside in the Gaza Strip and the West Bank would get a recognized state alongside Israel. This solution would also theoretically benefit Israel as it would lead to a more secure state. It's a decades-long goal that the international community has long pushed for but has failed to achieve. Even the US, by the way, insists that the only way to bring lasting peace is through the creation of a Palestinian state with guarantees for Israel's security. So what stopped the two-state solution, you ask? A number of obstacles, but chief among them is Israel's rejection of it. Not just that, ceasefire talks to end the current conflict have also hit a stalemate. What's more, Israel has defied all of Washington's warnings against the Rafah invasion. It has expanded its operations in the southern city of Gaza with the aim of dismantling Hamas, but has inadvertently made the humanitarian crisis worse. And all these actions by Israel complicate matters for the US as it tries to find a way to end the war. Which brings me to reason number 2 of why Biden's bet on Bibi has boomeranged. The International Criminal Court's top prosecutor has requested arrest warrants for the Israeli Prime Minister. The aim is to hold him and his defense chief, along with 3 Hamas leaders, accountable for alleged war crimes in Gaza. While the White House has opposed ICC prosecutors' move, more and more allies of the US have expressed support for the World Court. European countries, including France and Germany, issued statements affirming their support for the legitimacy of the ICC. Now, to be clear, the arrest warrant could take months to be issued. The US is not obligated to arrest Netanyahu if that happens or take any action. Why is that, you ask? Well, that's because the US is not a party to the ICC. US officials maintain that the ICC has no jurisdiction over Israel and that the case is unfair. Still, frustration around Israel is palpable. Tensions around the ICC prosecutor's decision could spell trouble for Biden and his Israel policy. For starters, the case could complicate efforts to bring the war to an end. Remember, negotiations have been trying for months to secure a ceasefire deal between Israel and Hamas, but it's not just that. The Biden administration also risks appearing hypocritical if it completely disregards the ICC's moves. In the past, Washington has weighed in on ICC cases. In fact, in 2023, ICC issued an arrest warrant against the Russian president, Vladimir Putin, for the war in Ukraine. At the time, Biden vehemently supported the ICC. So if Biden were to completely shun the ICC's decision against Netanyahu now, world leaders will question the Biden administration's hypocrisy. And despite the pressure, it does not look like the Biden administration will actually stop pushing back against the ICC's move. Earlier this month, the US State Department said that it did not find that Israel had violated international humanitarian law. Washington is going to continue with that narrative. Which then brings me to the third and last reason for why Biden's Israel policy has backfired. If the sentiment abroad is that of frustration, the Biden administration is increasingly facing flack at home for a failing Israel and doing little to help the Gazans. And that is a tough spot to be caught in. On Tuesday, by the way, the US Secretary of State Antony Blinken faced immense criticism from the right and left over Israel policy in the US Congress. While the Republicans accused the Biden administration of failing Israel, Democrats said it's doing too little to help the civilians in Gaza. Furious protesters interrupted Blinken as he began his testimony before two committees in the Senate. Some even called him a war criminal, accusing him of involvement in genocide, quote unquote. Blinken reiterated the support of Biden's administration for Israel, but insisted it was focused on easing the humanitarian crisis in Gaza. He said that the administration opposed an Israeli assault on Rafah. And we all remember the massive protests that broke out across university campuses in the US earlier this month. These are voices of dissent against the Biden administration's Israel policy. More importantly, what we are coming back to time and again is the human cost of the Gaza war. Over 35,000 Palestinians have been killed over the last several months in a horrific war that has had full American backing. Countless more are buried under the rubble, displaced, injured, and scarred for life. Still, the Biden administration has failed to demonstrably break from Netanyahu and use American leverage to actually bring an end to the war. Will the Biden administration re-evaluate its policy before it's too late? We will have to wait and watch. Has Rishi Sunak committed political suicide? You see, he has announced early elections. Sunak had until January 2025 to name the day, by the way, but he has jumped the gun. The UK elections will now take place on the 4th of July. The whole of the UK is stunned. Why did Sunak do this? What were his reasons? Because it was assumed that Sunak would at least wait till autumn for the big announcement. Even if he lost, he would at least have the comfort of finishing 2 years at 10 Downing Street. So why now rather than October or even November? Is it an unlikely act of daring? Maybe when you've had as much bad news as the UK Prime Minister, you may jump at the slightest hope of good fortune. On the morning of Sunak's election announcement, the Office for National Statistics announced that inflation is finally close to the 2% target. That means the Conservatives could go into the election with stable food prices and energy bills. The voters are finally feeling the impact of dual cuts to national insurance. Wages are perky, unemployment is relatively low. Sunak's Rwanda immigration scheme has also been passed. Moving now may spare him the embarrassment of an expected surge in boat crossings later in the summer. Is that what Sunak thought? There is one simple reason why a British Prime Minister would call a general election earlier than they have to. Because they know better than anyone else that things are going to get worse later, when they anticipate that their policies are going to fail in the future. With his announcement, Sunak has given up the chance to play the last few cards that some Tories hoped could help the party. His party is clearly unhappy with his decision. Tory members have branded the move a kamikaze election. They think the party is not ready to go to the polls, and they are right. The Tories are 20 points behind the opposition Labour Party in the polls. The early elections mean there will be no mini budget in early September. Some had seen that as the last roll of the dice. There will be no further cuts in taxes or national insurance contributions either. If there are interest rate cuts, they will come too late and will probably be too small to turn the mood around. Long story short, Tories' prospects to turn things around were grim to begin with. Now, the Prime Minister's decision has robbed them of a final push as well. All they have is 6 weeks to campaign. What can they possibly do to change the mood? Who was advising Sunak to take this call? This is the opposite of what Sunak's Foreign Secretary, David Cameron, had suggested. The man was brought in, remember, to talk some sense into Rishi Sunak. He endorsed plans to wait until later in the year for an election. The decision of early elections was so secret that even Sunak's Chancellor of the Exchequer, Jeremy Hunt, appeared surprised. Only last week, he had suggested he might again reduce payroll taxes in an autumn fiscal statement. All of that has gone down the drain now. Sunak was thought to be competent. It was his USP after the Johnson shambles and the Liz Truss catastrophe. But whatever he has done after taking office has only contradicted that theory. Former Prime Minister Boris Johnson has taken the opportunity, by the way, to launch attacks at Sunak. He said that the Conservatives are drifting to defeat and Sunak is offering voters nothing to rally behind. And he might not be wrong after all. There is an old saying in British politics: the Conservative Party is ruthless in its pursuit of power. But as of now, it seems relentlessly focused on losing it. In all of modern British political history, there has been only one July general election. It was back in 1945. Unlike now, many had assumed it would produce a Conservative victory. Instead, it ended in the most iconic Labour landslide win of the 20th century. Clement Attlee led his party to a 145-seat majority after Winston Churchill's Tories. What's going to happen during this year's July election? It might not be too difficult to guess. Ultra-processed food is ultra bad for you. Here on Gravitas, we have been raising alarm against these food items. And here we have another study that has made more shocking revelations. It's from Harvard. It has warned that eating ultra-processed foods can lead to stroke and cognitive impairment. Our next report telling you more.
A burger or a hot dog with extra cheese, French fries on the side, and a soda to go with it. Is that much different from your regular fast food order? Yes, it's tasty, no doubt about it. But is it worth the risks it brings along? All of the food items that we mentioned are ultra-processed. According to a new Harvard study, they can lead to stroke and cognitive impairment. Let us tell you a bit more about this study. It had 30,000 participants. All of them were 45 years or older. Researchers followed them for 11 years on an average. By the end of this period, 1,108 participants had a stroke. 768 were diagnosed with cognitive impairment. There's more. Participants who ate more ultra-processed foods than others had an 8% increase in stroke risk and 16% increase in the risk of developing cognitive impairment. Those who ate more whole foods, on the other hand, had a 9% decreased risk of stroke and 12% decreased risk of cognitive impairment. This isn't the first study raising alarm against ultra-processed food. In a large review of 45 studies, Researchers found ultra-processed food consumption was linked to over 30 health conditions. Unfortunately, despite its ill effects, we're getting more and more dependent on these food products. The situation is really bad in the US. Ultra-processed foods are the main source of food eaten by Americans. They make up almost 58% of Americans' total calories. This is according to a 2020 study published in BMJ. What makes ultra-processed foods so bad for your health? They are typically made from extracted substances like fats, added sugars, and starches. These foods are put through many processes and contain many added ingredients. Examples of ultra-processed foods include soda, chips, candy, ice cream, hot dogs, cereal, fries, and canned soup. Processed foods are slightly different because even after being altered, they're not necessarily dangerous to our health. But when it comes to staying healthy in the long term, nothing beats whole foods.
Is America selling Iron Dome lies? I ask that because according to reports, the US is aiming to establish a regional missile shield with its allies in the Gulf, a goal that it is pushing for in the region, inspired by Israel's successful defense against Iranian missiles and drones last month. But here's the kicker. Gulf allies don't share the same level of enthusiasm and confidence in the US. They doubt whether the US would come to their defense in the same way it did for Israel. Additionally, the Gulf allies are reluctant to take steps to fully integrate their defenses in a region that has historically hedged its bets. On May 22nd, a meeting was held in Riyadh of the US Gulf Cooperation Council. It comes just over a month after the US, the UK and other allies helped Israel knock down hundreds of Iranian missiles and drones last month. Not just that, the meeting also comes against the backdrop of missile and drone attacks by Yemen's Houthis against commercial shipping in the Red Sea. The sense is this, that US and British warships have demonstrated the power of Western air defenses. According to news agency Reuters, US defense officials say that America's Gulf allies recognize the successful defense of Israel was a result of years of defense integration among Israel's partners. But the question is, were they really successful? Have Western and Israeli air defenses really performed up to the mark? Have they really succeeded? You see, the Iranian attack was a response to Israel's April 1 bombing of the Iranian consulate in Syria that killed several Iranian military officials. Iran said that its attack was retaliation for a violation of its sovereignty. Iran also repeatedly warned Israel that it would be subject to some sort of a counterattack. In fact, several hours prior to the drone and missile attacks, Iran had also seized an Israeli-linked cargo vessel, clearly signaling that a larger-scale assault was fast approaching, prompting Israel to close its schools and ban larger gatherings. In other words, Iran was generous in handing out advance notices. Still, they failed to shield themselves from Iran's counterattack. Let's also not forget, it took Iranian drones almost 4 hours before they entered Israeli airspace. That also played in Israel's favor. So what is the Israel and what are the US and Israel really celebrating? This is not the success of air defenses. This is failure of their deterrence. As far as Israel's Iron Dome is concerned, time and again it has shown its vulnerability. It failed miserably when Hamas attacked on the 7th of October 2023, and then it failed again when Lebanon-based group Hezbollah fired missiles at the evacuated city of Kiryat Shmona early this month. Considering the fact that Israel's Iron Dome air defense system is considered the best in the world, the failures are more jarring than the successes. Is America planning to conceal the Iron Dome's failures and mislead its allies? If you are watching the show from North India, I know the heat is unbearable. It's almost too hot to function, with the mercury levels making lives miserable. And I have bad news, by the way. With the IMD, or the India Meteorological Department, issuing a red alert for parts of Rajasthan, Punjab, Haryana, Chandigarh, Delhi and West Uttar Pradesh. Severe heat wave conditions expected, with temperatures likely to exceed 47 degrees in several areas. Now, for those who may be unaware, quantitatively, heat wave is defined based on the temperature thresholds over a region in terms of actual temperature or its departure from normal. And what's a red alert? It refers to an extreme heat warning. It means that a severe heat wave has persisted for more than 2 days, or the total number of heat or severe heat wave days has been more than 6 days. As per the IMD, there is a very high likelihood of developing heat illness and heat stroke in all ages. I will in just a bit tell you what you can do to protect yourself. Speaking of how hot it really is in the national capital, how prepared is Delhi really to deal with the heat? Let's face it, it houses the Parliament of India, the Supreme Court, the President's House, so on and so forth. Are these high temperatures sustainable? Also, by the way, let me tell you what a World Bank report says. India could account for 34 million of the projected 80 million global job losses from heat stress associated productivity decline by 2030. Yes, heat stress associated productivity decline. Let's also tell you what a report by the McKinsey Global Institute says. With 75% of the workers in India experiencing heat-related stress, lost labor from rising heat and humidity could result in a loss of up to 4.5% of India's gross domestic product by the end of this decade. And going back to what I mentioned earlier, how can you protect yourself from heat waves? These are some of the things that you can do. Minimize outdoor activities. That's most important, particularly between noon and 3 p.m. since that is when the sun is at its peak. Also, drinking water regularly is very important, even if you don't feel thirsty. And try and opt for breathable and loose clothing while going out. Protect yourself perhaps by wearing hats and carry umbrellas and sunglasses if possible. Also, increase your intake of hydrating drinks. And if someone, unfortunately, gets a heat stroke, move them to a cool and shady area immediately. Remember, heat stroke is a medical emergency, so the affected person must be taken to the nearest health facility for urgent medical attention. Apply wet clothes and pour water on their body to reduce the temperature. Offer them with ORS, lemon juice, electrolytes, or other hydrating fluids. Meanwhile, speaking of the heat, let me tell you this. As part of a competition in the UK, school children offered their best one-liners. You know what the winning joke was? What's the hottest area in the classroom? And wait till you hear the answer. The corner, because it's 90 degrees. You get it? Now, the heat crisis is no joke, of course, but I hope that this one made you laugh. What happened aboard the Singapore Airlines flight from London has triggered a series of questions that we must not stop asking. Do airlines and civil aviation authorities need to revise the rules of flying? Because what happened to the Singapore Airlines flight was unusual. One moment the plane was at cruising altitude and the next moment it was shaking. Soon the plane dropped 6,000 feet. A passenger died. 30 others were injured. 20 remain in the ICU. It's scary to say the least. Singapore Airlines says it is investigating the cause of extreme turbulence, and we wait for the result of the probe. But in the meantime, we must tell you that this is the new normal, it seems. Incidents of turbulence are increasing around the world. And why does turbulence happen? Mostly because of strong winds. Turbulence is expected when a flight is ascending or descending. It's very common. And it's why it is mandatory to keep your seat belts on during takeoff and landing. But the Singapore Airlines flight was hit by turbulence at cruising height. That is when the seatbelt signs are off. People are walking around the cabin. What explains turbulence at such a height? Sometimes at a higher altitude, a plane is hit by turbulence because it is flying close to another aircraft. Turbulence is also common near mountain ranges or at the edges of the jet streams. Then you have clear air turbulence. It's dangerous because, as the name suggests, clear air turbulence cannot be seen. It is undetectable. It does not show up on the weather radar. So the pilots sitting in the flight deck do not know what's approaching them unless another flight in front of them has experienced severe turbulence and reported it. What often causes clear air turbulence is when warmer air rises into cooler air. A study published in 2023 reports a rise in clear air turbulence. What's the reason? Climate change. If that be the reason, then what's stopping safety guidelines from changing with the changing climate? If severe turbulence at cruising height is the new normal, shouldn't rules change as well, keeping in mind this new normal? Let's start by asking passengers to keep their seatbelts fastened at all times. I know it's inconvenient, but it's safe. Of course, that is what the flight safety protocol suggests, to keep the seatbelt on at all times. But making this mandatory is what we are suggesting. We know that pilots switch on the seatbelt signs when they expect turbulence, but clear air turbulence, like we mentioned, cannot be detected. One passenger traveling in the London-Singapore flight said the people on board did not receive any warning before the plane dropped thousands of feet. This passenger and his wife were thrown out of their seats, by the way. They went on to hit the ceiling. Their son was thrown on the floor. The passenger said some people who were walking around the cabin when the turbulence hit started doing somersaults. Another said people did not have the seatbelts on at that time. While some did put them on, those who could not or did not were thrown around the cabin. A third passenger said, and I'm quoting here, "I saw people from across the aisle going completely horizontal, hitting the ceiling and landing back down in like awkward position. People chipped their tooth. Some got a cut in their eye. People found themselves on the floor bleeding." What happened on that Singapore Airlines flight is an eye-opener. It calls for going back to the drawing board. Perhaps improving the quality of our seat belts as well. They have remained the same for the last couple of decades, after all. There is a need perhaps for some manufacturing rethinking as extreme turbulence becomes the new normal. Can manufacturers do something to ensure that the overhead storage bins do not open in such situations and heavy bags can be stopped from falling on passengers? Reports say that in the Singapore Airlines flight, the passengers who were in the washrooms were among those who were injured the worst. Can manufacturers make the flight washrooms safer? Like I said, we need to go back to the drawing room. What can be done immediately, though, is the change in the seatbelt policy for all flights, and definitely for some flight routes that are more turbulent than others. The route between Santiago and Santa Cruz is considered the world's most turbulent route, followed by Almaty-Bishkek, Lanzhou-Chengdu, Centrair-Sendai. The route between Milan and Geneva is the fifth most turbulent route in the world. In 2017, a study predicted that clear air turbulence may be 4 times as common by 2050. It means authorities must act now in order to avoid more loss of life in turbulent flights. And for you, it means next time, think twice before complaining about fastening your seatbelt. 12-year-old girl from Bengaluru in India developed a hole in her stomach. What can you possibly eat for that to happen? Well, it's something that can be easily found at events and even some restaurants, and is all the rage among youngsters. Why is that? Well, because of its smoky show. It's a new food trend to create frozen desserts or produce vapor clouds. And if you have not guessed already, I am talking about liquid nitrogen. It has already landed a girl in the ICU. How did that happen? Our next report getting you the complete story.
It was a wedding event in Bengaluru. A lot of delicacies were being served to the guests. Among them was smoky pan. Yes, the pan, also known as betelquid, was putting on quite a show. It was wrapped in a beautiful cloud of vapors, intriguing and appealing to the revelers, serving as the perfect content for Instagram reels and stories. You see, when food items are dipped in liquid nitrogen and then exposed to air, they produce vapors. A 12-year-old girl fell prey to the spectacle. Unsuspecting of the risks associated, the girl ate the smoky pan. Soon afterwards, she complained of severe stomach pain and bloating. It raised alarm among her family members. She was immediately taken to the hospital. Upon examination, the doctors discovered that the child had developed a hole in her stomach, and it was filled with gas. In medical terms, the condition is known as perforation peritonitis. It posed a threat to her life, so the doctors decided to operate on her immediately. They surgically removed the part of the stomach with the hole. The girl was in the ICU for 3 days. Nobody anticipated that this could happen. Risks are obviously there, but they are often ignored. No matter how beautiful it looks, liquid nitrogen is after all a compound that has no business in food. But it is increasingly being used to create frozen desserts or produce vapor clouds around food items. Liquid nitrogen has a very low boiling point of -196 degrees Celsius. So, at room temperature, it is present as gas. Apart from the aesthetics, liquid nitrogen has practical uses as well. It is used to freeze and reduce microbial growth during manufacturing processes. But it has several harmful effects. It produces effects on the skin similar to a burn. The extremely low temperature of the liquid can cause severe frostbite upon contact. Inhalation or ingesting the gas could lead to suffocation and airway or gastric perforations. Even 2 milliliters of it can release 1.5 liter of gas. Now the question is, if liquid nitrogen is so harmful, why isn't its use in food properly regulated? In India, some state governments advised against using it, but the rules are not very strict. The Tamil Nadu government has warned food business operators against using liquid nitrogen for direct consumption in food products like biscuits, ice creams, wafers, etc. It also said that liquid nitrogen should be fully evaporated from the food or drinks before being served, and it is permitted only as a processing aid, contact freezing and coloring agents. Now, Karnataka too has banned liquid nitrogen. Bureau Report, WION World is One.
Time now for Gravitas Recall. Today is the 23rd of May. On this day, in the year 1984, Bachendri Pal made history. She became the first Indian woman to reach the summit of Mount Everest. Pal was all of 12 when she first tried mountaineering. After college, Pal found herself applying for a mountaineering course. During the course, Pal became the first female to climb Gongtri, Mount Rudragarya. Pal was eventually chosen for India's first mixed-gender team to climb the Everest. The team had 6 women and 11 men. The expedition was titled Everest 84. The journey was fraught with danger. During the climb, Pal's camp was hit by an avalanche at the Lhotse Glacier. Pal was almost crushed. More than half of her teammates were injured. But the near-death experience could not dampen Pal's spirit. She continued her journey with few of the teammates, climbing through the ice, battling extreme temperatures and the cold wind. Bachendri Pal finally made it to the summit of the Everest on the 23rd of May at 7 minutes past 1 in the afternoon. She spent 43 minutes at the summit. Bachendri Pal's story comes with a reminder to not give up. On that note, it's a wrap on this edition of Gravitas Tonight. Thanks very much for watching. This is me, Molly Gampir, signing off.
Economic turmoil and global unrest have cast a shadow over President Joe Biden's approval ratings.
The rockets are continuing to be fired by Hamas in Gaza, although at a slower rate than previously.
So, right now, we are with the volunteers from the Aleppo municipality. They are still trying to go to the rescue for the people they can find out.
India has emerged as a major diplomatic force at the world stage.
The rising cost of living in Nigeria continues to impact citizens from all walks of life.
The citizens of Gujarat witnessed a mega roadshow here in the city of Ahmedabad.
China is South Africa's largest trading partner for 134 years straight.
A domestic aircraft carrying 72 people on board crashed in Pokhara city in central Nepal.
165 injuries have been moved, 61 people are confirmed dead, and rescue operations continue around me.
After receiving an entire season's rainfall in a span of 48 hours, Chennai city has literally been brought to its knees.
South Africa, for WION, World is One.
Namaste. Hello friends. We did Dr. Subhash Chandra show, popularly known as DSC show, for 4 years from August 2014 to August 2018. 28 states of Bharat. Of course, we reached out to all of you in 190 countries across the world. The show was very successful. Each episode was being watched by almost 25 million people every week. For past 6 years, the demand of the show has never died down. People write to us, people ask for the show to start again. Hence, we are beginning the show once again on All Z Network, also on WION, which is the global network channel from India. Again, thank you for your love and affection. See you soon at Subhash Chandra Show.
Know more, understand better, think ahead. Hello and a very warm welcome. You are watching Gravitas with me, Molly Gampir. Get the facts, not the bombast. On the 26th of March, dynamic pricing, Baloch separatists, Gravitas cuts out the clutter. Gravitas keeps calm when others scream. Gravitas brings news to life. Weekdays, 9 p.m. IST, 3:30 p.m. GMT. Gravitas. Seeing is believing.
the biggest democratic exercise on the planet ever. Decoding the multiple colors of this multi-dimensional, multi-layered spectacle. WION deciphers the images and the hues, sifts real performance from rhetoric and noise, claims and counterclaims, populist pitches and hidden truths. Untangling, unraveling this celebration of democracy.
This week on the West Asia Post, world mourns the death of Iranian President Ibrahim Raisi after the deadly helicopter crash. What lies ahead for Iran? Israel Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu faces ultimatum from within his cabinet as nations want to recognize Palestinian state and misery of the civilians in the West Bank continue. Also on the show, how Saudi Arabia is trying to win the modernity game.
Watch the West Asia Post with me, Redi Francis, this Friday at 7:30 p.m. IST, only on WION World is One.
As Karan Johar turns a year older, we trace the Indian filmmaker's glorious journey in showbiz. We also decode Indian cinema's prosthetic revolution and know some rare facts about the iconic star, Meryl Streep. All this and much more with me, Isha Hanspal, on WION E-Club at these times.
Everyone loves a contest. But sport isn't just about victory and defeat. When the GOATs in sport speak, you hear it first on WION.
You have to play good cricket over a period of time.
I actually pushed myself right out of the damn tournament.
We go beyond the stats. Our stories are quoted the world over.
At WION, sport is part of our DNA. Come, join us on this journey. Weekdays 6:30 p.m. IST, 1 p.m. GMT.
From the bustling trading floors of Wall Street to the vibrant exchanges of Asian stock markets, WION breaks it down for you to make sense of what's happening. As we reveal the key factors behind events, strategic battles, and the game-changing business decisions that shape the world. We bring you all of this and more on World Business Watch.
Vielleicht nur als